Hi guys, it's Carrie Hank
and Sarah Norris from the Star Institute, and today we're going to be talking about arousal regulation. So it's kind of a big word to talk about a very simple concept, which is basically how awake and alert you are throughout the day. So we know that there are lots of different states of arousal, and so we're going to talk about each of them and how it impacts how we function.
Yeah, so we'll start with low arousal. Other terms for low arousal might be groggy, sleepy, sick, maybe sad. It might look kind of like this. It might, seeing a child in the gym with low arousal, they're maybe laying on the floor, they're maybe seeming aloof or to themselves. For adults, they seem distant, they seem kind of detached from the world a little bit.
And low arousal is basically the way that we view it as OTs. It's a normal part of regulation, so everybody experiences low arousal at certain points. But when it starts to impact function is when you can't break out of it, or when you can't manage it, or you're experiencing it at inappropriate times.
Yeah, so for a neurotypical person even, low arousal, I have a personal experience. I like to go on runs in the morning, and one morning was an especially tired, kind of groggy morning, and I went out for a run, and there was a sidewalk that was a little bit uneven, and I fell and didn't have the responsiveness and the arousal to catch myself, and I fell and rolled, and of course my sensory brain right away attributed it to my arousal was too low. All of my other senses weren't responding as much as they would be if my arousal was a little bit higher in order to catch myself. It's a story I like to tell parents a lot, thinking about what is low arousal, or waking up in the middle of the night, especially if you're sick and maybe you bump into the wall on your way to the bathroom or on your way to the kitchen. Those would all be examples of all of us experiencing low arousal.
And so, like I said, it's normal for everyone to experience states of low arousal from time to time. When you're bored or when you're tired or when you haven't gotten enough sleep. So it's very normal to experience those if you have an explanation for it like that. It's not so much normal when you experience that all the time or regularly throughout the day.
Yeah, I think some of the adults that I've evaluated, some of them have had a hard time with depression throughout the years. And I've noticed that a lot of the adults that I work with, that low arousal, depression, low muscle tone, I've seen that there's a huge kind of correlation in kind of those states and where they've experienced them for prolonged periods for a lot of their life.
So I'm going to show you guys kind of a visual of what we're talking about. So these are the different states of arousal we're going to talk about. And so we've been talking about what the zones of regulation refer to as the blue zone. So the blue zone is low arousal. And again, it's normal for us to kind of have moments here, often at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, when you do have your lower surges in energy. But for most people, we actually like to see spending the majority of their time in this green zone, which is the just right zone. And so we're going to shift and talk a little bit about what that looks like.
Yeah, so the green zone, the just right zone, is a lot of times what we call it. You're calm, alert, oriented. You're able to listen to the teacher if you're in class. You're able to have good praxis. If you remember us talking about praxis a few weeks ago, you're able to plan, sequence, execute motor actions. You're able to access all of your capabilities. So a lot of times individuals come into us and they say, well, I know that I'm smart. I know I have all these great skill sets, but I can't access them throughout my day because I'm in low arousal or high arousal. But when you're in that just right place, you can access all of your strengths, your good attributes. You have energy. You're feeling energized, alive.
Yeah, and so for a lot of our clients, it's a very elusive place, that just right place, because they tend to be on one end of the spectrum or the other as far as how alert they tend to be. So it can be really tricky to find that just right place and to stay there. So for most people, they spend most of their day there, and they may have little dips like after lunch and things like that, where they might get a little bit tired, and they may have moments of high arousal when they're feeling stressed about something. But for the most part, typical people spend most of their time in that just right place. And you know you're there when you can find that state of flow where things are going well, you feel like you're connecting with whatever it is you're working on or whoever you're with. And it's just where good things happen. So like Carrie said, you're able to function well. I think also that's where you're also able to feel well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot of times where we start out with, thinking about our adolescent and adult clients. Kind of one of our overarching goals at STAR is to find joy back in life. And if you're not even able to know what calm and alert feels like, which is not uncommon for individuals with SPD, we need to start with, what does green zone feel like? What is calm? And I don't even have a reference point for what that feels like. A lot of my day is too fast or too slow, or a lot or a little. And so we start there and really thinking about, what does green zone feel like, and feeling okay being in that zone.
Yeah, that kind of brings us to our next zone and talking about where you feel okay, because we have a lot of clients, kids and adults, that actually feel a little bit better in the yellow zone. So we affectionately call it the fun fast zone, but it's essentially where you're a little bit more amped up than when you're calm and alert. So you might be really alert, really focused, really intensely engaged in something. And this can be positive or it can be negative. So we're going to talk about what that can look like.
Yeah, and so kind of the fun, fast, yellow zone, like you said, it can be excited, or it can be feeling a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of frustration, where sometimes I refer to it with kids as a little bit out of control in your body. So commonly when I talk to parents about this, they say, oh, yep, that's where I like to be. I drink 6 cups of coffee right away in the morning, and I like to kind of be in that fun, fast zone. I like doing high energy workout videos. I like doing things fast. I like doing multiple things at once. I need to be moving in a quick rate in all areas in order to feel most comfortable in my sensory world. And we see that with our kids as well. In the classrooms, they're bouncing one wall to the other, they're bouncing in their chairs, they're running from the parking lot into the school building. And a lot of times what we're finding is with SPD, whether you're a sensory craver or maybe your sensory systems are under responsive, and so you constantly you feel like you need to be moving fast in order to feel awake, or if you're over responsive, your arousal tends to kind of hang out up there. And so this is such a common place that a lot of individuals can relate with. Yep, I like being at that fun, fast zone.
Yeah, or I'm stuck there, like you were saying, when you have more of that anxiety tendency.
Mm-hmm.
And again, all of the arousal zones are normal in certain situations. So it's appropriate to feel like you're in the yellow zone when you're competing in the Olympics, or when you are seeing your best friend after a year, or when you're taking a test that's determining whether or not you're going to get into the college you want to. So there are points in your life where it's important for you to have kind of that heightened arousal, because it does work with the hormones in your body to kind of help you perform at your top ability. But when you're there too much, that's where it leads to exhaustion and crashes and actually moving to the next zone, which is the red zone. So that's high arousal. And a lot of times we talk about that being scary fast, or we talk about that being out of control. And so again, red zone is actually appropriate sometimes. That, if someone hurt your child, it's appropriate for you to feel enraged and to want to protect your child. Or if someone attacked you, it's important for you to have that response to protect yourself. But then there are also times where it's not appropriate.
Yeah, and I think this is an area that I spend a lot of time talking to individuals who have that SOR, the sensory over-responsive profile. You've heard me talking about it in previous videos of the fight, flight, or fright response. And so at arousal at its highest level, that's what our body responds with, is the fight or flight response. And so our body's perceiving it as a potential threat or a potential danger. And we lose control of our body, like you said. We start sweating, our heart might start racing, we might get aggressive, we might just flee the situation, we might actually run out of the room, run out of work. And when you're over responsive to sensory input, red zone is so much more common for you than a person with a neurotypical nervous system. And you're spending so much of your day just trying to get your body out of that potential danger, even though your brain might even be telling your body, I know that this isn't threatening, I know that these bright lights are not threatening, but your nervous system is saying it's a potential threat, potential danger, and it's using up a lot of your energy. And a lot of times spending, even having 3 or 2, even 1 experience of being in the red zone throughout the day, it can completely wipe you out for the rest of the day. And this is where our adults that we've talked with, they just end up on the couch at the end of the day, just trying to reboot and trying to get any of those energy coins back for the next day.
Yeah, so it's definitely when you aren't able to move very well between the different zones or the different states of arousal where you start to really have challenges with functioning. Mm-hmm. And there's all kinds of different ways that can happen, as we've given you some examples for. But there are also a lot of really great strategies that you can learn. And one of the things that we work on at STAR is using sensory strategies. There's also cognitive strategies. There's a lot of different behavioral approaches. But we do find that senses are really powerful. And we do see that they trigger a lot of people into these different states, and they get stuck there. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we talk about is figuring out how do we start to wiggle within those different states, and how do we start to identify when we're in a certain state. Mm-hmm. Because it helps to define I'm not feeling good into more specifics of I'm not feeling good because I'm overstimulated or I'm tired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it starts out with very basic principles of what raises our arousal, what gets us from blue to green to yellow to red, and what can decrease our arousal. And it's not so simple as to say there's these 5 strategies that will raise your arousal or there's these 5 strategies that will decrease your arousal. It's really an individual differences. It's really about the individual sensory profile. And so that's, as occupational therapists, that's why we start with identifying how do you respond to different sensations. So for different people, different types of sensations properly increase their arousal or decrease their arousal. And it's really finding out what are those power senses that can give you more control over your arousal and not just feel like, well, I have no idea. I know I just bounced from blue to red to blue to red. The more we learn about ourselves and the more we learn what different senses do, the more we can kind of hang out in that green, greenish yellow kind of area. And save some of our energy so we can have it throughout the whole day and not just kind of spend all our energy coins in that fun fast or way too fast red zone.
So one other way of looking at this that's kind of fun, especially for kids, is thinking about our body having different speeds, having different engine speeds. And again, talking about moving through those speeds and being able to find the right one for the situation. So the alert program uses this as talking about being high, low, and just right, and talking about it being an engine. So thinking about a blue engine being more like a beat-up car that barely goes and can't even go up past 40 miles an hour, and a green engine being a Honda that just works no matter what. And then like the red engine being more of like a Ferrari that just goes too fast. And so sometimes that's a really fun way to talk about it with kids, to talk about when they need to be careful and slow their bodies down, or when they need help revving their engine so that they can be able to function.
Yeah, I've used the Winnie the Pooh references before too, because I think the characters in that show are so easy to replicate. We talk about Eeyore being kind of too slow, or that blue engine. Winnie the Pooh would be an example of that just right engine, or kind of that green zone. And Tigger is one of the characters that likes to hang out in the fun fast zone, or maybe is running a little bit too fast. And we'll actually have kids show us with their bodies how they can be in each of these zones, and it's really empowering for the kid to be able to have control of that. And we find, especially in that slow Eeyore zone, that can be really hard. It requires more muscle control. It requires really processing our sensations and thinking about, what is my body telling me right now? And so we kind of use a mesh of those two programs. And it kind of depends on the individual. But we use this visual with kids, young kids, parents, all the way up to, I've used it with older adults just to give a visual. I think this really helps kind of hone in on what we mean by arousal regulation, and kind of getting in that optimal state of arousal.
One other thing I really like about this is that it takes away all of those emotion concepts from your state of arousal. So, we do talk about how different emotion states feel like you're in these different zones. And we've talked about, excitement and frustration, and we've talked about feeling good, and we've talked about feeling enraged and being sad. But the nice thing is that it's not always an emotion that's causing you to be in that zone. So you might be in the blue zone because you didn't get enough sleep. It's not because you're depressed or because you're actually sad about anything. You just need to wake up. And the same way is like, you may not necessarily be angry. You might be overstimulated and you've just gotten too much alerting input. It doesn't necessarily have to have an emotional root. And I think that's a really nice thing, especially for parents when they're trying to communicate with their children. And the only words that they have are emotion-based, and the kids haven't developed those concepts yet.
Right.
So being able to simplify it and be able to just figure out what zone everybody's in. And one other thing that I really like about it is talking about how regulation can be contagious. So especially this red zone over here, if someone that you're close to is in the red zone, it's very, very easy to get sucked into that zone with them. And I think that's really helpful for parents to hear, because it can be really challenging staying regulated when you have a child who frequently goes to the red zone. And so you may go right there with them. And so it does take a lot of recognition and work to try your best to stay out of the red zone when you're working with someone who's in it.
Yeah, a lot of times I will send my families or my adults home with this visual, and I'll have them put it on their fridge. So it's in a centralized location in their house, and I'll have everybody in the family check in of where their bodies are at, maybe before a family meal, or before, if they're going to have a family meeting, or if there's something that they're going to do that requires optimal arousal. It's really helpful and can be really empowering for our kiddos with SPD to know that everybody fluctuates in their arousal throughout the day, and it's okay for moms and dads to say, you know what, I'm kind of having a blue zone day. I might need something to kind of get my arousal into the green zone. I wonder what I could do. And teaching parents how they can be models for their kids of getting in that just right zone, because we know even, in any given day, we all fluctuate on that arousal curve. And being models for our spouses, being models for our kids, being models for our parents can be a really helpful way to teach arousal in a whole context and in a whole family dynamic.
So we're really hopeful that this information helps you understand arousal regulation and maybe start applying it to your interactions with other people, or especially your understanding of yourself. We just find it extremely beneficial for the people that we work with to know this and to apply it. So if you have questions, definitely post them below. I am also going to remind you guys about the symposium coming up in October and the whole day parent workshop that's actually intended for people with SPD, parents, and as well as people that work with parents of children that have sensory challenges. So it's really going to have a lot of content that a lot of people will be able to use, and I really hope to see some of you there.
Thanks, guys.